we mean when we say God is all-knowing? What do you think that means? He knows everything. This idea of knowledge is something that's his, and there's no bounds to it. He doesn't read a book and learn something new today, right? There's no bounds to it, right? So is God a God of free will? Interesting. So wait a minute. He's not a mechanical, machine-type person who knows everything. He actually has the freedom to make decisions himself? Interesting. Who created us? Okay, did he create us as in his image? Then by logic, what does that mean about us? We have free will. So basically we sit there and we say, okay, logically, if he's a God of free will and he knows everything and he created us, then I know by logic I have free will. Now, do animals have free will? Think so? Will a chimpanzee always act like a chimpanzee, or does it ever say, you know, today I want to be a cat, or you know, I think I'll go swimming, or something? Do animals pretty much function the same way depending on the type of animal they are? Why do they do that? Because they've been programmed that way, right? So how do we know we're different? How do we know? So you got this weird thing going on in Genesis, right? Isn't it interesting? It's always in the Bible. So you go to Genesis chapter 1 and God says, you know, I made leopards, earthworms, rhinos, giraffes. I made all these things. I think I'm going to make this one creation, but what I'm going to do different is I'm going to breathe into them. You'll notice he never breathes into an earthworm or a tiger or anything. And he says when he breathes into them, they become a living soul. And he says the reason he breathes into them is he wants this one creation to have his image. That's why we have free will and animals don't, because he gives it to us in Genesis. So we know logically we have free will. So then the question, now that we know we have free will, the question doesn't make any sense. And the question's a little different. Now the question is, if he's all-knowing, he already knows what I'm going to do. Right? Okay. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? So what he does throughout life, it says, is he's constantly putting in front of people all these ways to get your attention, because he wants what you don't know to be what he knows, which is to come to him. And he knows in advance people that will say no. But he doesn't stop doing that, and because he's a person. And guess what happens as a person when he's doing that? It's killing him. It's hurting him, because he's realizing there are going to be people that are going to say no. They will, and he knows it. And so he asked us, the greatest thing you can do is I don't want to show you in the crowd a bunch of people who are going to have little lights over their heads saying, hey, they'll say yes, go talk to him. He wants you to have, with Christ living in you, to just tell people, to tell everybody. And he'll take care of the conviction that brings to that person's soul their need for him, or they'll reject him. Does that make sense? Right. So this idea of bad things, right? So what people who usually ask that question are saying, my idea of bad things. You know, I have a definition of bad things. And these bad things, God knows are going to happen. Why doesn't he stop them? Why do people want God to step in and stop bad things? Because they don't like them, right? So what they're really saying is, would you just make sure whatever happens to me are good things? And God is sitting there going, but you're a bad thing. In other words, the things that happen in this world, are going to wake you up. So therefore, what you think is so bad is not so bad. It's really good. Because without them, you won't know. And you'll go through life thinking, well, I don't need God. Everything's great. We have a bunch of people like that. So with the introduction of sin, this idea of the sin that turns the world upside down, now we have these bad things happening. And guess what they're designed to do for people? See, this is the part we don't like, and we always point back to God. It's his fault. God looks at us and says, you know what you're like? You are the most stubborn, bronze-headed. He literally says you have an iron neck of sinew and a bronze brow. I don't know if you've ever seen kids like this. If you have children, you ever seen a child go like this? I'm not going to eat the broccoli. I won't do it. Right? What are they doing when they do that? Refusing what the parent wants. God looks at all of us and saying, well, you know what you have? You have a brow bronze, you're stubborn and rebellious, and an iron sinew. You will not do what I want you to do. The result of that are bad things. These things are happening. And who do we blame for them? God. And he's looking at you going, if you just would listen to me, then you'd realize that the things that happen in your life are for your good, not your bad. Now, I would never sit in the hospital. I went through this with my son, had people say, well, this is great, Ed, actually, because he's going to use this injury for the glory, his glory one day. And I'm going, really? I don't think so. I'd rather that my son never went through this injury. So I don't need to hear that. But I know that what happened, happened. And I know that God is sovereign. And however he's going to work this out, here we are 15 years later, my son is awesome. And it has worked out really well. So I know these things. So God, this idea of bad is us. It's not him. He never says in the Bible he can't wait to give you bad stuff because he wants you to somehow grow. The world is full of it. And he's there for you. That's who he is as a God. He's a loving God.
This makes me wonder, like, all the way back in the beginning, like, when Satan first interacted with Adam and Eve, is that considered good then? And then, or is it seen as, like, setting us up for failure?
No, not at all. Actually, if you look at that, what happens in that scene, that whole thing, is that before it happens, God says something to Eve, and he says something to Adam. We look at that and we say, oh, God's given a rule to them. Don't eat from the tree. You know, why does he have to put that rule in there? Why does he do that? That's not what it says. It actually says, God says, of everything in the garden, everything you can have. That's how the verse starts. It's all yours. There's this one tree out of everything. This tree is called the knowledge of good and evil. Do me a favor, never touch it, because today you don't know evil. You don't know the difference. You're innocent. So just leave it alone. So you know what God's saying? Trust me. That's all he's saying. Trust me. Eve goes, okay, I'm going to trust you. Here comes the serpent. The serpent says to Eve, you know, God's kind of neurotic. Actually, what he means is, if you were to eat from that tree, you'd be like him. Right? And, you know, your eyes would be open, and God, because he's neurotic, he's like, you know, the Kim Jong-un or whoever his name is in North Korea, he's all paranoid that you're going to eat from this tree and all of a sudden you'll be able to take over for him. So your eyes will be open, you'll be just like him. And he's like, what he should have done is said, well, wait a minute, I'm in love with him, he's my father, all I have to do is trust him. What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Instead of what she goes is, yeah, that kind of sounds pretty good. I think I'll do it. And she throws a whole world upside down. The problem is, Adam's supposed to be there with him, and he's not. So the two of them, the first thing that happens when she does that, what happens to him? What's that? Okay, so big deal. They were always naked. Why is it a big deal? Something new is introduced. What does it mean when they say they're ashamed? What does that mean? For the first time in their life, they've actually experienced what it's like to be a sinner. They've never known it before. You know what it's like to sin? How do you feel? Yeah, especially when you get caught. Well, the first thing that happens is now all of a sudden, sin has become an experience and it's part of who they are, and their first reaction is, I hate this, I'm really ashamed, I'm going to hide. It's always us, it's not God. What does God do? What does he have to do to fix this?
With the clothes?
Huh?
With the clothes? Or
What does he do?
he kills animal and makes clothes out of the skin?
This is really interesting. Just very quickly, there's a book for the Egypt. You know, God brings the Israelites out of Egypt. You know what their book is called? The Book of the Dead. That's their book. With the Hebrews, with us in the New Testament, what is our book called? The Book of Life. Ours is not like the Egyptians. We're the Book of Life. God is a God of life. In him was life, and the life is the light of men. Do you think God wants to kill something to cover Adam and Eve? God is hurting. We look at this story as Adam and Eve screwed up. You know what God has to do? He has to kill something. He's not a God who kills things. It's terrible. He has to do that right away to try to restore and cover Adam and Eve. Again, guys, look at it from the standpoint of us. We're the ones that are the cause of this. God is the one who always acts because he loves us. Does this make sense?